morning and welcome to this edition of our weekly program, The Aviator World, where we bring to the understanding of Nigerians issues in the aviation industry. I am Ohwivie Ubudaga. Today we shall be looking at making Nigeria an aviation hub in the West Africa sub-region. Our guest on the program this morning is a lawyer with a bias for the aviation laws and has practiced for over 20 years. Barr Irukera, you're welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Bibi.
Now, we'll take a short break to see this report.
The increased activity in Nigeria's aviation industry is driven largely by the revamped infrastructure in the sector. As simple as this may sound, huge domestic passenger traffic is a significant ingredient to this boom, as the country's airports in the last 1 year experienced a rise in passenger movement.
The growth of general aviation is unbelievably amazing. Private jets, that's growth. Those people are not coming here because they are coming to play. And that's why also we're also presenting a picture of being able to manage them well. When you have growth, you have to manage your growth. And you must match that growth with the people, with the resources, with the strategy, and with the processes.
As Nigeria's business environment is being liberalized, the aviation industry is also being repositioned to attract investors who at most times come in as airline passengers.
We are changing a lot of things, changing the culture of FAN, changing the way that we manage airports, so that it's the way other people manage airports, changing the way we concession, from a net remover of value to the airport authority to a net gainer of value, because concessions generally mean that the airport is doing business through private investors. The way it has always been is the private investors are doing business at the expense of the airport. So we're getting away from there now into the way it's done in the rest of the world.
In an effort to make Nigeria a hub in the West African sub-region, an investment tour was embarked on by the aviation minister and her team. A number of countries across continents were visited in a bid to attract the attention of global players to the ever-growing Nigerian market.
Ministry of Aviation embarked on extensive repositioning of aviation sector in Nigeria. Aviation sector in Nigeria will serve as the driving force behind our economic growth. We have designed a roadmap and a master plan that will enhance this growth for us. We have embarked on Aerotropolis. Our Aerotropolis is very elaborate, has huge business potentials and opportunities. It has time frame.
No doubt, Nigeria's geographical location and vibrant population is a great selling point, which is why several bilateral air service agreements have been signed by the Nigerian government.
The agreement on aviation, to try and build the 4 terminals. We finally signed the credit which had been approved by the National Assembly. And so we'll be, the Minister of Aviation was also there. We'll be able to kick off work on the new terminals, I think, which will bring our infrastructure in aviation up to date. We need bigger terminals. You can see what happens in Lagos and Abuja and so on, and better ones.
As more airlines make Nigeria their first stop in West Africa, business models are being developed to tap from the value chain. These include the development of perishable cargo terminals, building of airport cities, and better enforcement of regulations.
What you have in Dubai, which is what Aerotropolis really is, and so they can come here, do all their shopping, do everything and anything they want to do, and we take them back. You can see how that impacts economically to our economic growth. The labor market that is going to create, the commerce alone within the airports. And that's why we say that airport is not just where the aircraft land. It is a commercial center. It is a business center.
So far, corresponding responses from foreign investors is ushering a ray of hope, as an agreement has been signed with a Chinese consortium for the provision of a $500 million loan facility to build 4 brand new airport terminals.
You are welcome back. Let's get down to business. Now, the federal government's vision for the aviation industry is to make Nigeria a hub of the West African sub-region. In aviation parlance, what is a hub?
Well, essentially, a hub means a base, a typical place where you have the vast majority of operations. And in very developed countries like the United States, most airports, very big airports in the big cities, are hubs. But you'd have an airline that has a hub in a certain airport. For instance, Delta has a hub in Atlanta. Okay. United has its main offices out of Chicago, has a big hub in Houston and Newark. And so essentially what a hub means is that it's a distribution point. It's a place where you have a significant amount of your base operations and from where you distribute your passengers.
What you just said now takes me to what I wanted to know next. Now, is the focus of the federal government the aviation as in the airport hub, or is it for the airlines? And when we're talking airlines, my thinking now is the focus ought to be on a flag carrier.
Well, actually, because of how things are here, I mean, it's not so much as getting airlines to have a hub. Typically what drives that process is the infrastructure. And so what the government's role would be to set up the infrastructure in such a way that it can accommodate those kinds of operations. And so obviously what the government would do would be to make the environment sufficiently attractive for the airlines to want to operate Nigeria or a certain airport in Nigeria as a hub.
Now, talking of making the environment attractive, that would include, for instance, fuel prices, aviation fuel prices, bringing them down to something that airlines can afford. We're also going to be looking at the consistency of the policies. In this direction, do you have any idea what the government is doing?
Well, I think fuel pricing probably to a lesser extent than policy, in the sense that, I mean, fuel prices are what they are, and it might not be a big difference if it's if it's the same price across the board. But if you do need to have a policy that supports driving that business model of becoming a hub, and that would include concessioning at the airport, what kind of services you find at the airport, what kind of facilities are at the airport, and what kind of incentives for airlines to want to operate out of that airport or want to locate a significant amount of their business there. That would include what kind of ground services are available, what kind of pricing methodology, and what kind of infrastructure that you really have. Okay.
You have the airport operators, that's FAN, you have the regulators, NCAA, and there are policies that they put in place for the running of the operations to make aviation now more investor friendly. Now the question for me is, complaints have been made in the past that these regulators and operators have an aggressive way of debt collection. Okay?
Okay.
How would that impact on the whole dream of making our airports, at least in West Africa, a hub?
Well, my first thing on whether an operator or a regulator has an aggressive approach to collecting debt raises the question of how responsible the operators and concessionaires are. Okay. I think the reality of it is that there shouldn't be the need for any aggression. There should be a very clearly stated pricing system and a payment system. And if everything works well and everybody plays their role, I would not see the need for any debt collection. Now, the question is whether the charges and the taxes are significantly high to the point where it could where it could discourage the kind of investment airlines would require to make Nigeria a hub. I'd like to understand that. I'd like to look at that comparatively with other locations in the world, and also compare what the cost of operations are in Nigeria with other parts of the world. The one thing I know for sure is that air travel in Nigeria, whether domestic or international, is expensive, comparatively significantly expensive. So I'm not, I mean, it would be painting with broad strokes to quickly determine that the port charges or concession charges or other parking charges, whatever the charges are excessive. It would have to be a more data-based or information-based analysis to come to that conclusion.
Okay, we'll work on that, but possibly when next you come on the program.
Absolutely.
Okay, but now let's move away from that area and let's take a look at the steps taken so far to actualize this project, the vision of making the Nigeria a hub.
Okay, and I think from a policy standpoint, I've repeatedly heard that. I understand that there is a national aviation policy that promotes the model to make Nigeria a hub. Now, I think that's a good starting point. You've got to have a policy that says that we want to head in this direction. Okay. And obviously, the folks who take responsibility for implementing that policy would follow through with the details. I've seen the material on the Aerotropolis essentially, and that's an important aspect of creating a hub. Airports are now more integrated facilities. They're just not a place where you arrive and just fly. I usually look at the bag from duty free in Amsterdam, and it says see, buy, fly, meaning that an airport is a place to see, it's also a place to buy, and it's also a place to fly. And so you have an Aerotropolis that supports that kind of investment and that kind of ambience where airports can be a place to shop, can be a place to hang out. For instance, if you have an airport that doesn't have all these integrated facilities, then it's not very friendly to passengers to want to stick around for a period of time. Now, if you want an airport to be a hub, passengers have to be able to walk around, shop, eat, so that they can arrive. I mean, and with that in mind, airlines can say, look, where's the best place to put our passengers when there's going to be a long layover? Okay. If that place is Muritala Mohammed Airport, that's exactly what they would do. They would ensure that all their traffic that's coming from other parts of the country or other parts of the sub-region would come to Muritala Mohammed to connect to their flights later in the day. And that has a multiplier effect. It increases the business, it improves the business of the airline, it creates jobs locally, and certainly creates economic activity.
Okay, you say Nigeria, of course, has quite a bit of a population. And I was reading something recently that said we had, on the average, about 10 million passengers flying in Nigeria every year.
Okay.
And that number is likely to go up to about 50 million in about 10 years. But when you look at our local operations, where are the airlines?
Well, I agree that the domestic passenger movement is fast growing. I wouldn't be surprised if it's the fastest growing in Africa. And
it's actually said to be one of the fastest in the world.
Right. So, I mean, and I won't be surprised at that at all. And actually, it's conceivable that ultimately we would have by far the greatest domestic traffic in Africa. Now, where are the airlines? There are lots of things that go into a successful airline business. It's a marathon. I mean, the cost of just one aircraft itself is incredibly expensive. And so what I suspect we would see is with the clarity in policy now, and obviously the growing domestic market, you begin to see the airlines growing a lot more, see new ones emerging. And then, obviously, I think at some point the reality of the economic sense would be that there'll be some level of consolidation, because I don't see how you can take the full advantage of the market if what you still do is operate a just a couple of aircraft. Ultimately, the economies of scale will make it sensible that airlines pool their resources together, have X number of aircraft. I mean, for instance, an airline that's already very good on a Lagos-Abuja route coming together with one that's already good on a Lagos-Port Harcourt route would only maximize benefit to both the profitability and certainly the passengers.
Well, funding is a bit of a problem for them. How can we address this? Because without funding, they cannot expand on their operations. And I don't think it's something that an operator can do on its own, just setting out. So how do we address this?
Well, typically in a very liberalized aviation economy, the government's role is relatively diminished. State aid is something that is frowned on internationally. But having said that, governments must recognize what their priorities are and pursue those priorities in a manner that ensures that they achieve their aspirations. I certainly think that some kind of assistance to the aviation industry is sensible, and there are arguments for that. We've seen that in the banking industry, we've seen that in the capital market industry. But how that ultimately happens is a question of the devil in the detail. From what I've seen, the current the Minister of Aviation has worked on quite a policy document on how to assist operators secure aircraft with some kind of a support or guarantee from the federal government. That certainly helps, because by far the aircraft are the biggest assets and the most expensive assets that airlines need to acquire.
Okay. Back to my earlier question, Nigeria's population, most populous in Africa, how has it impacted on the industry?
It certainly has.
How? In
the sense that you just mentioned that it's the fastest growing market, certainly in Africa, and one of the fastest in the world. That is a function of the population. And Nigerians are very versatile people. I think our population is also driving the sub-regional travel across the West African region. And looking at international travel, I had the privilege of being part of some of the bilateral air service negotiations between Nigeria and other countries. And one thing is very clear, and that is that there is a keen interest of other countries, their airlines flying into Nigeria. The reason is because there's a good market and they're getting good load factors and yield from flying here. And obviously our population is a big factor in supporting that.
Well, for the business of aviation to be successful now, there has to be confidence in the industry. Now, you want to tell us how well this is being done, especially against the backdrop of safety?
Well, I think that that's critical. I mean, and I probably understand that the background for this question is, well, there's a whole lot out there about whether the airspace is safe, whether flying in Nigeria is safe, and then, of course, against the backdrop of what two civilian air crashes in less than 2 years with fatalities. I think we've still got work to do, but I mean, my first engagement in aircraft fatal accidents in Nigeria was as far back as 2001. And I'll be the first to say that in the past years, we've come a long way. I remember at that time,